Anna had always believed she could balance her perfect life, devoted wife, loving mother, with the secret she kept hidden in the shadows. But when she met Father O'Connor, a man bound by vows, she found herself tangled in a dangerous game of desire and betrayal. What started as a fleeting connection soon spiraled into an affair that would shatter everything. But as Anna and Father O'Connor played with fire, they never imagined that one night, Thomas, her husband, her rock, would uncover their darkest secret, and the consequences would be deadlier than they ever feared. Anna Roberts had always been the epitome of the perfect housewife, living in a quaint two-story home on Maple Street in the peaceful town of St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. Her life seemed like a well-rehearsed performance. She was married to Thomas, a successful lawyer, and together they had 2 children, Emily, 12, and Sam, 9. They attended the local church, hosted family dinners, and spent their weekends volunteering or at neighborhood barbecues. On the outside, it appeared as though Anna had everything anyone could want: a stable marriage, a lovely family, a home full of warmth and laughter. But as the years passed, Anna began to feel a gnawing emptiness in her life. Her marriage to Thomas, though reliable, had grown stale. They had become roommates more than romantic partners. Their conversations centered around bills, the kids' school schedules, and the occasional mundane complaint about work. Gone were the late-night talks, the surprise dates, the fiery attraction that had once defined their relationship. Anna loved Thomas, but the passion that once fueled their connection had long since faded. It wasn't that Thomas was a bad man. Quite the opposite. He was a devoted husband and father, responsible and reliable. But as Anna moved through the daily routines of school runs, grocery shopping, and cleaning, she felt an increasing sense of dissatisfaction with her life. There was something missing, something she couldn't quite put into words, but it was undeniable. It was the smell of the fresh princess that infected her, and it was during one of her weekly volunteer shifts at St. Mary's Church that things began to change. The parish had recently welcomed a new priest, Father Matthew O'Connor, a young man in his early 30s with a quiet yet magnetic presence. Father O'Connor had taken over from the former priest who had left under mysterious circumstances, though no one in town spoke of it directly. Father O'Connor was a stark contrast to the elderly priest he had replaced. He was confident, compassionate, and undeniably charming. His sermons were filled with an intellectual depth that captivated not only the congregation, but Anna as well. At first, their interactions were brief and professional. Anna helped organize church events, and Father O'Connor often asked her to assist with small tasks or to run errands for him. She admired his calm and thoughtful demeanor, and when their conversations strayed from parish business to more personal matters, Anna found herself increasingly drawn to him. He asked questions about her life, her family, her hopes and dreams, and for the first time in a long while, Anna felt like someone truly cared to know the woman behind the wife and mother. Father O'Connor, too, noticed Anna. She was not just another volunteer. There was something about her that lingered in his thoughts long after their interactions ended. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was the vulnerability she unknowingly carried, a quiet sadness in her eyes that seemed to mirror his own. As a priest, he had sworn an oath of celibacy, and his entire life was meant to be dedicated to God and his parishioners. But in Anna, he saw something that stirred him, a connection that he couldn't explain, one that he had no business feeling, but nonetheless couldn't shake. Their meetings, at first casual and friendly, soon became more frequent. They began sharing personal stories, confiding in one another. Anna would stop by the church after hours to help Father O'Connor with administrative tasks, and they'd end up talking long into the evening, their discussions ranging from theology to philosophy, from their childhoods to their regrets. There was a comfort in these conversations, a relief in the way they could talk without judgment or pretense. But as their bond grew, so did the undeniable chemistry between them. It started with the smallest things: longer eye contact, a soft touch on the arm when passing something, lingering just a little too long after each goodbye. Anna began to feel a sense of excitement when she saw him, a rush of anticipation when they spoke. She felt alive in ways she hadn't in years, and every glance from Father O'Connor made her heart flutter. At first, Anna brushed these feelings aside, telling herself they were just innocent emotions. But deep down, she knew it was more. What had begun as a simple connection over shared interests and mutual respect had begun to morph into something much more dangerous, something neither of them was ready to face. Still, there was no turning back now. The line had already blurred, and with each passing day, it became harder to resist. The affair had not yet begun, but it was already there, hovering in the space between them, a temptation neither could fully ignore. For Anna, it was a strange mix of guilt and longing. She loved Thomas, but she was starved for something deeper, something real. And Father O'Connor, despite his vows, seemed to understand her in a way no one else did. The dangerous attraction between them built, slowly but steadily. Each conversation, each glance, pulling them closer to a precipice neither was willing to acknowledge. Anna's perfect life, the one she had built with Thomas, was beginning to unravel. In the quiet of the church, under the warm, flickering light of stained glass windows, she began to wonder if there was more to life than being just a wife and mother. And as she stood there, staring into the darkened sanctuary, Anna couldn't help but feel that something dangerous was about to happen. The tension between Anna and Father O'Connor grew more palpable with each passing day. Their interactions, once innocent and filled with pleasantries, had slowly transformed into something much more charged, something neither of them could ignore. What had started as casual conversations in the quiet corners of St. Mary's Church had become intense exchanges laden with unspoken feelings, stolen glances, and lingering touches. Despite their awareness of the consequences, neither Anna nor Father O'Connor could push the growing connection aside. It was as though something magnetic bound them, pulling them toward each other with an inevitability they couldn't escape. Anna, who had once prided herself on managing every aspect of her life, now found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She had never expected to feel such a strong attraction to a priest, someone who was supposed to be untouchable, bound by vows she could never truly understand. But with Father O'Connor, it was different. He made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Desirable, important, seen. The loneliness she had been battling in her marriage to Thomas seemed to vanish whenever she was with him. Each conversation with the priest seemed to peel back layers of her heart she hadn't known existed. On the surface, Anna's life continued as normal. She kept up the appearances. Her children went to school, Thomas went to work, and she dutifully tended to her family's needs. But internally, she was torn between the life she had built with her husband and the forbidden connection she had with Father O'Connor. The duality of her existence left her restless. It wasn't that she didn't love Thomas. She did. Nothing else mattered. It wasn't that she didn't love Thomas. She did. He was a good man, reliable and steady. But their relationship had become more of a partnership than a marriage. The passion had faded years ago, replaced by routine and comfort. She didn't blame Thomas for it, but she couldn't ignore the emptiness that had taken its place. The affair, dangerous as it was, gave her something she hadn't realized she craved, a feeling of aliveness. Father O'Connor, too, was struggling with the feelings that had developed between them. He had entered the priesthood with clear intentions, to serve God and his community. But Anna, with her vulnerability and warmth, had become a distraction, a temptation that gnawed at his every thought. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He had taken vows of celibacy, promising to give himself fully to his faith and his parish. Yet when Anna was near, the resolve that had once been so strong crumbled. There was something in the way she looked at him, something unspoken, that made him question his entire life's purpose. The emotional connection he shared with her was undeniable, but it was the physical pull that terrified him. How could he, a man of the cloth, betray everything he had committed to? Yet every time they met, every time they spoke, the pull between them grew stronger. It was during one of their late-night meetings at the church that things began to shift. Anna had come to help Father O'Connor after the evening mass, a simple task at first, but the air was thick with unspoken words. As they stood together near the altar, discussing the upcoming church event, their eyes met, and for the first time, neither of them looked away. Anna could feel the heat between them, the shared understanding that something had changed, that whatever had been building up for weeks could no longer be ignored. She felt her breath catch in her throat as she noticed how close he had gotten to her, his presence overwhelming. Without a word, Father O'Connor reached out, his fingers brushing against her arm. The simple touch sent a wave of electricity through Anna, and for a moment neither of them moved. It wasn't until he cleared his throat that they both seemed to snap back to reality. "We can't keep doing this," he said, his voice strained. But it wasn't a question. It was a statement. He knew it as well as she did. This was no longer just an innocent connection. They had crossed a line, and they were both in too deep to turn back. Anna swallowed hard, feeling her pulse race. "I know," she whispered, but the truth was, she didn't know what to do. She had crossed that line, and now there was no way to uncross it. The affair had begun, and the guilt that came with it was suffocating. But so was the desire. It was a dangerous game, and both of them were complicit. As they stood there in the dimly lit church, an unspoken agreement passed between them. They would continue this, whatever this was, even if they both knew the consequences would be severe. The secrecy, the thrill of the forbidden, was intoxicating, and in the moments they spent together, Anna felt more alive than she had in years. It was as though in the presence of Father O'Connor, all her doubts and fears melted away, replaced with a sense of freedom she had never known. But reality was never far behind. As the days passed, the guilt weighed heavier on Anna's conscience. She hadn't told Thomas where she was going at night, nor had she explained the subtle changes in her behavior. He hadn't asked, but she could see the concern in his eyes. He was starting to notice. She knew it wouldn't be long before he confronted her. The thought of losing Thomas, of the potential fallout from the affair, gnawed at her, but it wasn't enough to make her walk away from Father O'Connor. Not yet. The affair had a grip on her she didn't fully understand. But one thing was certain. She was no longer the woman she had been. The safe, predictable life she had built with her family was crumbling around her, piece by piece. And though she didn't know where this path would lead, Anna couldn't find the strength to stop walking it. The weeks that followed were a blur of secrecy and longing. Anna tried to maintain her facade of a perfect wife and mother, but the cracks were beginning to show. Her late nights at the church became more frequent, and her excuses for being absent from family events grew thinner. She could feel Thomas's gaze on her more often, the subtle suspicion in his eyes growing with each passing day. He had always trusted her implicitly, but now there was a distance between them that even he couldn't ignore. She was no longer the same woman he had married. The joy she once felt in their quiet evenings together had dissipated, replaced by the anxiety of what she was hiding. Every encounter with Father O'Connor deepened her internal conflict. There were moments when she wished she could walk away from everything, her marriage, her family, the weight of the guilt pressing down on her. But those moments were fleeting. The truth was, she wasn't sure if she could walk away from him. The passion they shared was something she had never experienced before. With Thomas, it had always been a steady, predictable love, one built on comfort and familiarity. But with Father O'Connor, it was like a fire, intense, all-consuming and uncontrollable. She couldn't ignore it, couldn't deny the pull between them. No matter how wrong it felt, each time they met it was as if the rest of the world faded away. The quiet church, the late-night whispers, the stolen touches. It felt like an escape, a return to something real. Father O'Connor had his own internal battle. He was a man of the cloth, bound by vows of celibacy and a sacred duty to serve his parishioners. But Anna's presence seemed to unravel every principle he had built his life around. He was drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. There was an innocence about her, a vulnerability that reminded him of a time before the weight of responsibility had hardened him. But there was something else, too. Her eyes, the way she looked at him, made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. She was the youngest of the three girls. She still looked the same. One evening, after a long day of parish duties, Anna arrived at the church later than usual. The storm outside had brought a chilling wind, and the streets were nearly deserted. She felt a mix of excitement and dread as she walked up the steps of St. Mary's, knowing that Father O'Connor would be waiting. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the familiar smell of incense and old wood filling her senses. He was standing by the altar, his hands clasped in front of him as though deep in thought. As soon as he saw her, the weight of their unspoken words seemed to fill the space between them. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his voice tense. Anna nodded, her heart racing. She knew what he was referring to. They had reached a point where avoiding the reality of their actions was no longer possible. What had started as a harmless flirtation had turned into something far more dangerous, and neither of them seemed capable of stopping it. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," Anna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought this would happen. I never thought I could betray Thomas like this. But when I'm with you, it feels like I'm really alive again, like I'm someone more than just a wife and mother. I don't know if I can give that up." Father O'Connor's expression softened, though there was a clear sadness in his eyes. "Anna, you don't understand," he said, stepping closer to her. "What we're doing, it's wrong. I've sworn a vow to God. I can't keep breaking it, no matter how much I feel for you. It's destroying both of us." But even as he spoke those words, Anna could see the conflict on his face. She could feel the hesitation in his touch when he reached out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. They both knew it was over, and yet neither could pull away. It was as though something invisible held them together, even as the truth of their situation began to seep in. The air between them was thick with tension, and neither of them knew what to say. They had reached a crossroads, and the consequences of their choices were beginning to surface. Anna was terrified of losing everything, her family, her husband, and the life she had built. But with each passing day, the attraction to Father O'Connor grew stronger. She found herself thinking about him when she should have been focused on her children or her marriage. Her heart raced when she received a message from him. Her breath caught when she saw him standing at the altar, his eyes locking with hers. Father O'Connor, too, felt the weight of their relationship. He had taken his vows seriously, had committed himself to a life of service, yet Anna had become a constant presence in his thoughts. He had come to rely on her, to lean on her when the pressures of his life as a priest seemed unbearable. She had become more than just a parishioner. She had become a lifeline, a person who understood him in ways no one else could. But there was still the matter of their guilt. The shame they both felt was a constant presence in their hearts. It wasn't just the affair that weighed on them. It was the fear of discovery, the knowledge that if anyone found out, their worlds would come crashing down. Anna's marriage to Thomas would be shattered beyond repair, and Father O'Connor's career, his very calling, would be over. The stakes were higher than either of them wanted to admit, but neither seemed willing to walk away. That evening, as they stood together in the dimly lit church, Anna realized that they had crossed a point of no return. It wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about something deeper, something they couldn't escape. The emotional bond between them was undeniable, and it was becoming harder to ignore the powerful connection they shared. But as the rain beat against the windows and the storm raged outside, Anna knew that this wasn't just a reckless affair. It was a storm of its own, one that would eventually destroy everything in its path. Neither of them could predict what would happen next, but deep down, Anna knew that the consequences of their actions were looming larger than ever before. They were playing a dangerous game, and sooner or later, the truth would come out. The days that followed that fateful night were a blur of anxiety and unease for Anna. She hadn't seen Thomas at home when she returned, and for that she was both relieved and terrified. It gave her time to compose herself, but the weight of what had happened in the church hung heavily over her, like a dark cloud. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look in Thomas's eyes when he walked into the church, the fleeting moment when she realized he had come far too close to discovering her secret. Father O'Connor had texted her the next morning a simple message: "We need to talk." Anna's heart dropped as she read the words. She had been expecting it, but the reality of it felt like a punch in the gut. What did they need to talk about? The kiss? The growing closeness? Or worse, the very real possibility that the entire affair was about to be exposed? That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Anna sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. Thomas hadn't mentioned anything about the church, and for that she was grateful. He'd been distant, too preoccupied with his work to ask questions, but his silence felt more ominous than comforting. Anna had always prided herself on being able to manage her life, her family, her marriage, her obligations, but now she felt utterly powerless. The lie she had built her life around, the life she had so carefully curated, was crumbling before her eyes. She couldn't stay in this limbo. The affair with Father O'Connor had to end, or so she kept telling herself. But the thought of walking away from him felt like cutting off a part of herself. The passion, the thrill, the feeling of being truly seen. It was intoxicating. How could she just walk away from that? Every part of her longed for him in a way that made no sense. She hoped she had betrayed Thomas, the man who had stood by her for years, and yet here she was, yearning for a man who had sworn to stay away from all earthly desires. The meeting with Father O'Connor was scheduled for the following evening. They had agreed to meet at the church again after hours, when no one would see them. As Anna arrived, her heart thudded in her chest. The church seemed quieter than usual, the air thick with the weight of her guilt. She felt as though she were walking into a trap, but she didn't know how to stop herself. Father O'Connor was already waiting, standing near the altar, his expression unreadable. His usual warmth was replaced by something colder, more distant. Hannah felt a chill run through her as she approached him. The connection between them, once electric and undeniable, now felt strained, as though the tension of their situation had seeped into their every movement. "Have you found the rest of the agreement?" she asked. "I've been thinking," Hannah began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to stop this. We can't keep going like this. It's wrong. It's dangerous." Father O'Connor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her with a look that sent a shiver down her spine. His eyes seemed deeper, more burdened than she remembered. He was wrestling with his own demons, and Anna could see it in the way his jaw tightened and his hands fidgeted at his sides. "Do you want to stop?" he finally asked, his voice low and measured. The question caught Anna off guard. She had expected him to agree, to voice his own fears about the affair, but instead, he seemed to be challenging her, pushing her to confront her feelings. Anna hesitated, feeling the pull of his gaze, the heat of his presence. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can stop." Father O'Connor's gaze softened, though there was a sadness in it now, a resignation that had not been there before. "I can't keep doing this either," he said. "But I can't walk away from you, Anna. I don't know if I can live with myself if I let you go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of their truth. Anna wanted to respond, to say something that would reassure him, to fix the mess they had created. But the truth was, she was no longer sure of anything. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. She had betrayed her husband, her family, and herself in a way she never thought possible. And now, she was standing on the precipice, unsure of whether to step back or fall deeper into the abyss. In that moment, the sound of a car door slamming outside echoed through the empty church, jolting Anna out of her thoughts. The door creaked open and footsteps could be heard approaching. Her heart sank. There was no mistaking the sound. Thomas was here. Without thinking, Anna stepped back, her pulse racing. Father O'Connor glanced toward the door, his face paling. They had been caught. No, not yet, but they were on the edge of being discovered. They couldn't risk it anymore. There was no more time to talk, no more time to pretend that everything was going to be okay. Anna turned toward the door, her heart thumping in her chest. She had to leave, but she didn't know how to do it without tearing everything apart. As she fled into the shadows of the church, she knew one thing for certain: everything was about to come crashing down. The life she had built with Thomas, the safety of her family, and the forbidden passion she had found in Father O'Connor's arms. It was all teetering on the edge of destruction, and there was no turning back now. The inevitable moment arrived with a quiet, suffocating certainty. Anna had known for days that the affair with Father O'Connor could not stay hidden forever, but the truth had never seemed so close, so dangerously within reach. Until that night. It had started like any other meeting, Anna's heart racing with excitement as she slipped out of the house after dinner, telling Thomas she was visiting a friend. The lie had become second nature now, each excuse feeling emptier than the last. She had grown accustomed to the guilt, the weight of the secret that pressed down on her. But that night, it felt heavier than ever. The storm outside matched the turmoil within her. Thunder cracked, and lightning illuminated the sky as Anna made her way to the church. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, the familiar ache of longing coursing through her veins. She had been seeing Father O'Connor for months now, their encounters growing more frequent, more intense. Each time they met, she told herself it would be the last. But each time it felt impossible to walk away. She was in too deep, caught between the love for her family and the forbidden passion she found in the priest's arms. When she arrived at St. Mary's, the church was dark and silent, save for the faint hum of the old heater in the corner. Father O'Connor was already there, waiting near the altar as he always did, his tall figure a shadow against the stained glass windows. There was something different about him tonight, though. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with an unsettling tension. As Anna approached him, she saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes darted nervously toward the door. He looked like a man who was waiting for something to break, something to shatter. "I didn't think you'd come tonight," Father O'Connor said quietly, his voice barely audible over the storm outside. Anna stopped in front of him, her heart thudding in her chest. "Why wouldn't I come?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but the fear in her voice betrayed her. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, as though searching for something in her eyes, something that had been lost or was fading. Then, in a tone that was heavy with resignation, he spoke. "Thomas knows." The words hit Anna like a slap to the face. Her stomach lurched, and for a moment the world around her seemed to spin. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't think. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "He knows you've been lying," Father O'Connor said. "I don't know how, but he followed you tonight. I saw him drive past the church before you came in." His voice faltered slightly. "He's here." Anna froze. Her mind raced. Thomas was here, just outside, lurking in the shadows. He knew. She couldn't bring herself to process the full weight of the revelation. How much had he figured out? Did he know everything? Before she could ask another question, the door at the back of the church creaked open. The sound echoed through the hollow sanctuary, loud against the stillness. Anna's blood ran cold. She turned sharply, her eyes wide with fear. There, standing in the doorway, was Thomas, his face pale, his eyes locked on hers. Anna's heart stopped. Time seemed to stretch, everything slowing down. Thomas looked different. His usual calm and composed demeanor was gone. He looked broken, angry, his expression unreadable. He had been standing there for who knew how long, watching her, waiting for the moment she would slip. Thomas didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, taking in the scene. Anna, the priest, the darkness that enveloped them all. He had seen enough. His eyes flicked to Father O'Connor and then back to Anna, his gaze filled with a mixture of confusion, hurt, and something far darker. He had seen everything. "I knew something wasn't right," he said finally, his voice low and strained. "But this is something else." Anna felt the weight of his words, the crushing blow of her actions finally coming to fruition. There was no denying it now. No more lies. No more pretending. The truth was out, standing in the doorway with Thomas. "I'm sorry," Anna whispered, though the words felt hollow. She wanted to reach out to him to explain, but the damage was already done. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. There was no going back. Father O'Connor stepped forward, his hands raised slightly as though trying to make peace, but Thomas took a step toward him. "Stay away from her," Thomas spat, his voice full of venom. You betrayed everything you stood for." Father O'Connor didn't respond. He didn't have to. The guilt was written all over him. His collar, his vow, his entire life as a priest. It all seemed so distant now. The man he had tried to be had been replaced by someone who had given in to temptation, someone who had betrayed the very thing he had pledged his life to. He couldn't undo what he had done, and he knew it. For Anna, the reality of the situation sank in like a stone dropping to the bottom of the ocean. Thomas was right. She had betrayed him, betrayed everything they had built together. She had destroyed the life they had once shared. Thomas took another step closer to her, his eyes cold and hard. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through her like a blade. He didn't wait for an answer. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the church, leaving Anna standing there, shattered. Father O'Connor looked at her, his face filled with sorrow. But there was no comfort to be found in his eyes. There was no relief. The affair had cost them both everything, and it had come to an end in the most painful way possible. Hannah stood there, alone in the church, the storm outside now seeming insignificant compared to the storm within her heart. She had lost her family, she had lost her husband, and she had lost herself.